going to talk today about sort of Russian technique, or rather than myths and truths. And I was contemplating that for a bit, thinking, what are the myths? And one thought that did occur is what happened to the Soviet Union, where sort of the Russian school was born, was a closed country. There was no exit, there was no very little entry. And people didn't really know what was going on inside. The outside world had no idea. So when Russian pianists were starting coming out to the West, they were very different. There was a very different school of playing, different way of playing and approaching piano playing. And of course that produced almost a sort of mystical effect. People were thinking, oh, this is something extraordinary, this is something amazing, this is something so different. And almost kind of thinking of it in a mysterious way. And what has happened, and what was not obvious to the West, is Russia has developed a school, of pedagogical school, of teaching piano in a very systematic manner. It was sort of developed into music school, then there was a specialist music college, and every time people were writing reports, writing documents, writing observations about the physical process of playing piano, what it is. So music was very much taken very seriously as a science. And of course I have to say that at that time, the Soviet state, in order to prove that we were the best in the world in everything we did, which was highly political game, obviously used music as a political game as well, to show that we can be first in that field as well. So there was a lot of investment going on into music school. All music education was free, and sort of lacked the social phenomenon of whereby everybody has the equal right. In Soviet Russia, it was very clear those who had the talent were pushed, and those who didn't get pushed. But of course, what you got sort of to hear was the very top, the very creme of the Russian pianistic school. So, in my view, one of the myths is there is no such thing as a Russian technique. And what it is, it's a new way, and because the technique develops through century, when we hear to very old masters from the old recordings and then going on to the Soviet era, you just see here development and new discoveries about how to play piano. So I think what Russian did is they approached it very systematically, and they studied this as science, and wrote about it, and there was generation after generation of people growing up inside a system. And I think this is very important, the systematic approach. And of course, very keen to develop it further. So I think this is one of the myths to me. Parallel to this, the truth about it is that the technique, what was developed is the work on technique. And I think, as I was sort of contemplating this, maybe, perhaps, Russians are responsible for this kind of athletic pianism that's happened, that is so cultivated these days, because they kind of, because of that systematic and step-by-step thinking about it, they've given a lot of sort of ideas and development to accuracy of playing, to consistency, to wizardry, technical wizardry. And this was, of course, very impressive to those who listened. But mistakenly they were thinking, oh, they're just, they were born in Russia, so they're some kind of wizards, virtuosic wizards. There was none of that. There was just, really proper, systematic teaching. I think through two things. One, through understanding, obviously knowing the types of techniques there are, but also understanding the physical phenomenon behind it. What does your body do? How do you do certain technique? How does your body react? So I think there was a lot of that. When you went to the classes as I was growing up, going to many professors, in Moscow Conservatory, in Kiev Conservatory, and watching them teach, there was a lot of talk about how to do things, what does your body doing, why certain things are not working. Particular attention was paid to tension. There's a lot of tension sometimes in the body of people who develop and learn to use the instrument, and spotting that early enough and addressing these issues were a very important part of that kind of scientific approach that was developed. And I remember I was still in secondary school, sort of between the years of 15 to 19, when we had a lot of professors coming from Moscow Conservatory and talking about how to spot technique, for example, or how to spot tension in the body. All this kind of muscular muscles that people sometimes do with the jaw, what happens with the upper body, how does the hand position work. So there was a lot of attention, and people thought this was very, very important. In the schools, being systematic kind of approach, we had to go through certain repertoire suggestions, and there were a certain amount of etudes or studies covered in a term. Plus, there was always contrapunctual music, or Bach particularly, and then Viennese classics, and then romantic. So it was sort of very regimented studies, and it wasn't just, oh, you're good at Chopin, oh, play a lot of Chopin. There was not a lot of that. There was a lot of stretching going on and educating, real proper educating. I think that happened, and some people, of course, made it to the stage, some never made it to the stage, but they still had a very good understanding through that schooling of styles, etc. I remember myself going, after I moved to Britain, visiting Russia, and looking for a place to practice because my mother couldn't take it anymore. So I went to a music school, and there was a doorkeeper. And he said, oh, we started talking, and he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm there. He said, are you a pianist? I said, yes. Oh, would you please play to me a Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven? And so we got to a small hall, and I started playing, and the man was just sitting there with the tears in his eyes. And he told me story that he said, in the Soviet times, I had a full collection of Beethoven, the vinyls, the round, recordings, and of course, once the Russia became capitalist, all of that he had to sell and make a living, becoming a doorkeeper. So there's a whole kind of bunch of this very educated people who do different sort of steps in life and different walks of life, but they all had this sort of systematic learning and been exposed to great music. So, talking about sort of technique, when there are, as you probably all know, there are different types of technique, and we always, started with 5-finger position, and then went on to sort of scales playing, where you have to get used to move your thumb in a certain way, your first finger, and then arpeggios playing, and there was the double notes, what else, octaves, repetitions, chords, and of course the polyphony was considered, to be a particular sort of branch of that. And with every sort of type of technique that you were given, as opposed to together with the repertoire, there's a lot of analysis going on about how do you do certain things, because the real technical question is not what to do necessarily, but how to do this. So, you need, because Russians were thinking in their system, you need to develop a set of skills, just like a master that comes to, repair your door, and it comes and opens a bag full of, hammers and screws and whatnot. So the Russian idea of thinking was, at the time, you've got to build this set of various technical abilities, skills, we used to call them. And then with that, you were free, you didn't have to worry about how to interpret great pieces. You need to then you could think about music. So the idea was that when the person enters conservatoire, which happens at the age of 19, they are technically ready to take any challenge. So they can then grow as musicians, you know, from 19 to 25 and further. They can dedicate themselves fully and completely to the study of music, rather than worrying about how to play double notes. One other myth that I was thinking about was that people thought that Russian musicians just did techniques and they were so great because they worked 10 hours and 11 hours on playing octaves and arpeggios and studying, you know, and scales and so on. And actually that's, I think, possibly is the biggest misunderstanding. Because I think for any Russian, what is very important is to, first of all, to capture a musical image. And if you really work with great Russian masters, they will talk to you a lot about what is this piece is about. You know, what is its character, what are its themes, how do they coexist together, are they in conflict, are they in harmony, what goes on between them. Because, and of course initially when you begin to study music, the musical image can be sometimes a little vague, you know, or a little bit unclear, but it's very important that you do have an understanding of what piece of music you play. I mean, it may sound very common sense, but it isn't. Because very often people approach it just by kind of starting reading notes and worrying about, oh, this I need to work at that technically, or oh, this is a little slurs here and there. And they lose an idea of what is the piece saying. And I think this is one of the things that certainly the training I've gone through, it was first you need to understand, and as you work on the piece, the music image crystallizes more and more. Now, why is that important? Talking about technique. Because if you know what you're going to say, then you can choose the set of tools. You can then think, you know, this is how I need to do it. This is again the question, how. But you will only apply this question, how I need to do it, if you know what you're doing. So this is something very simple, I think, but very, very important to understand. And of course, from an ideal for character, because I don't know, often, for example, if I teach and the new people that I come across with, if I sometimes ask what character is this piece, and they will start talking about harmonies, they will start talking about, oh, well, this phrase goes there, and you know, there is that. And I said, okay, but what's the mood? And people just don't talk about it. I don't know why, but maybe it's not considered to be the sort of sophisticated to say that something is very sad, you know, or how that we need to speak a professional language. I don't know, but these things are very, very important. And of course, the better you understand the musical image of the piece, then you have a better understanding of structure and form. And the other thing that is important in the musical image study of that is what language it speaks. So what style it is. So you need to be learning, and this is certainly what was happening, was a study of Baroque language, there was a study of Viennese language, or classical Viennese music, and study of romantic language. So each composer speaks with its own language, and in its own language there are idiosyncrasies, you know, there are things that only relate to that particular person. And of course that relates to, again, how you do things. So I think from that perspective of technique, there are things that are very important, is actually a very thorough study what is required, what is the character of the piece, and also study of shapes, structures, from small structures such as sometimes motifs or phrases to structures of bigger structures which are musical forms.